Hey everyone! When making models, you'll run into a lot of situations where you want to optimize your geometry, especially for video games. But you don't really want to lose all the extra detail those high poly counts let you have. That's where baking normals comes in. But before we can bake normals, we need to make a low poly model that's roughly the same shape as our high poly model. Add a circle. 16 vertices should be more than enough. Zero out its position. Then place it at the bottom of the model. In edit mode, scale to roughly match its size. Now we should probably name it and include low poly somehow in there. Now just extrude and trace the high poly model. I've found that adding a one loop bevel to sharp edges makes them look a lot better when the normals are baked. How many edge loops you want is completely up to you. You literally could just make a tube and it would somewhat resemble the high poly model, but the closer you get, the better the result. It's a trade-off between geometry and how pretty it is close up. It really depends on the scope of your project. At the end, extrude and hit M, choose Merge at Center. And here's our low poly model. Pretty simple. If you haven't already, name the nose object. And close up the bottom of the model. Select all and shade smooth. The low poly model has 544 tries, whereas the high poly model has 10,290 tries, which is a significant difference in geometry. Don't worry about the seams here, there's no need to unwrap the high poly model, I was just testing something off screen. Select the low poly model, switch to the shader editor, and create a new material. Add an image texture node, and a normal map. Create a new image of whatever size you prefer. Name this image something to do with normals. Connect the color to the normal map's color input. Switch over to the UV editor, open up the new texture, enable the visibility of both the low and high poly model. Select the high poly model in the outliner, and then control select the low poly model. Switch the render engine over to cycles so we can bake our normals. Under the bake menu, our settings should still be set up from baking our textures earlier, but if not, enable selected to active, cage, and set cage extrusion to 0.5 meters? What is that, 0.5 m? One last thing we need to take care of is to unwrap our low poly model. Select edges and add seams wherever you want. My brain wants to mark sharp constantly, so make sure you choose mark seams. There's really no rule of how you should unwrap. You can put as many or as few seams as you'd like. You're really just trying to make it lay flat without distortion, so just whatever that takes to get to. Now select all and choose unwrap. You can leave your UV map as is, it'll work completely fine, but I'm going to adjust mine to make use of as much texture space as possible by squaring off my UVs. If you also want to square off your UVs, find a face in the UV editor, preferably one that is almost rectangular, and select the vertices on each edge. Scale by 0 on either the Y or X axis to square off the edge. Do this on all 4 sides. Switch to face select in the UV editor. In the 3D viewport, make sure that only the faces you want to adjust are selected. Face select and Ctrl L are helpful for getting selected on the UV islands you want in the 3D viewport. Then select your adjusted face and hit A over the UV editor. Now hit U and choose Follow Active Quads. This makes the UV all nice and flat. There's no point other than to use the texture space more efficiently, so you can go through and do this for every UV island if you want. It's up to you, and position everything to take up the texture space nicely. If you're actually making a character to use in a game, you'd want to unwrap the arms and nose as well and include them here, and then deselect clear image over here. But you could bake multiple textures as well if that's what you prefer. Now that we've got the low poly model unwrapped, let's select the high poly and then control select the low poly model in the outliner and bake our normals. Normal maps should not have these colors, which means my low poly model probably has inverted normals. So select the low poly model, and in edit mode select all, hit Alt N, and recalculate outside. Do the same with the high poly model just in case. Now you can try baking your normals again. I've occasionally in the past had troubles getting my textures to update, so if you ever run into this, go into the Blender file in the outliner and delete the troublesome texture. Then go into the shader editor and recreate your deleted texture. Head into the image editor and open up your new old texture so we can watch it bake. And finally, rebake. Make sure to select the models in the right order. High poly, then low poly. If your textures overlap, you'll want to drop the margin and rebake, otherwise the textures will sometimes kind of bleed together. Don't forget to save this image somewhere. Always save everything. Switch to the shader editor and connect the normal to the normal. And look, our low poly model now has the normals from the high poly model, so it interacts with the light as if it's got a bunch of geometry. There's little edge lines along the faces because the normal map's color mode isn't set correctly. It should be non-color, but since I haven't saved the image yet, I can't change that setting, so we'll come back to it. Now we want to bake a color texture. Enable the visibility of the high poly model. Then in the low poly model's material, add a new image node and create a new texture. Switch to the image editor and open up the new image so we can watch it bake. Select the high poly model and Control select the low poly model in the outliner. Switch the bake type to diffuse and deselect direct and indirect. Now hit bake. Looks like it turned out pretty well, so save this image and let's put it on our model. Switch back to the shader editor and connect the color image to the shader color input. Turn off the high poly model. Switch over to Eevee and turn on the nose and arms. If we position our light in here, the issue with the normals is pretty visible, which we can fix simply by going into the shader editor and changing our normal textures settings from RGB to non-color. And now it looks great. Even check out the shading on the eyes. You'd almost think that the face has depth, but it doesn't. It's just our low poly model with a normal map, which is pretty cool. Normal maps are pretty amazing for adding a ton of extra detail, and they're very simple to make in Blender. If you'd like to take a look at the Jingloid blend file, we have it hosted up on our Patreon, free for everyone, link in the description. Thank you for watching, I hope you enjoyed, and hopefully you picked up a thing or two about making your low poly models way more detailed. Please subscribe and like the video, leave us a comment on what you'd like to see. If you'd like to help the channel grow, share our video. We also have a Patreon. Thank you again, stay safe, I love you all, goodbye!